You're tuned in, tuned up, and ready to go. Welcome to Ria's Ham Shack, a weekly conversation about amateur radio, shortwave listening, and radio tech, hosted by Ria Gyro, N2RJ, and heard weekly on WRMI Legends Shortwave. And now, here's your host, Ria.
Guten Tag from Germany. This is Ria N2RJ from, yes, I am in Germany. We are at the Ham Radio Friedrichshafen show, or at least going to be tomorrow. I just landed this morning after taking a red-eye flight from JFK Airport in New York. So you might ask why I'm here. Well, I'm here with the ARDC, Amateur Radio Digital Communications, and I've also always wanted to go to this show because I have a lot of friends in Europe, and then some of them I've met at Dayton Hamvention, but others I really haven't met otherwise. So I want to, meet up with them. Ham radio, part of the big reasons for ham radio is international goodwill. It is in our basis and purpose. And for a lot of people, ham radio is about the friends. So I'm going to talk about some of the great things that I do with friends in ham radio and why you should consider the social aspect of ham radio as a very important thing. Now, the team this year for Friedrichshafen is Ham Radio or STEM Champs. They have a lot of innovation, particularly with youth, and I'm going to be meeting up with some of them. In particular, I'm very interested in the M17 project, which is a digital radio system designed to provide an open and free, not in so much in cost, but free in terms of freedom of software and hardware expression. So I'm interested to see what they're up to. Well, anyway, I'll talk more about Friedrichshafen, but let's first take a break and come right back. You love the news on Ria's Ham Shack. You're going to absolutely love the news on Ria's Substack. So to go to n2rj.substack.com, where you'll find the news, views, and opinions, and all sorts of interesting angles that you will find nowhere else. n2rj.substack.com. It's a weekly newsletter. It's absolutely free. You can sign up. You can tell your friends. You can learn about all the happenings in ham radio for the past week. And, some interesting news, views, opinions, and commentary, which you'll really not find anywhere else. n2rj.substack.com, n2rj.substack.com. We put it in your inbox once a week, and you get a convenient digest to read everything you need to know about amateur radio. n2rj.substack.com, n2rj.substack.com. Be sure to subscribe. So when I got started in DXing, actually even before that, when I first got licensed, ham radio has always had a very strong social point to it. And I never realized just how deep it runs and how it transcends borders and all of these things until I got into DXing and contesting. Once I got into DXing and contesting, the floodgates kind of opened. I essentially had a few million friends in no time. And I mean, literally had people who I've never seen, in person, but we still share this deep connection and love of radio. So here I am in Germany, and tomorrow we're going to the international exhibition of Ham Radio Friedrichshafen, which is going to showcase amateur radio in Europe primarily, but also I've seen there are a few from the Americas. There are also some from Asia. I've seen particularly Champ E21 EIC. Champ is from Thailand, and he is here as well. So it'll be nice to meet up with him. It'll be nice to meet up with a lot of people from, some of them even from, parts of Africa and other parts of the world. But it is about the friends. And the friends are a very strong motivation for me to continue in amateur radio. I started off in amateur radio because of tech, okay? But in that tech, that tech is used to communicate with other people. And ham radio is ultimately a means to communicate. whether we do it with commercial equipment, whether we do it with homebrew equipment, in the end, the goal is to communicate and send out messages. Specifically, you cannot really just broadcast on amateur radio. You can in some respects. I mean, the ARRL does the bulletins, which are essentially broadcasts, but broadcasts intended only for radio amateurs. And other organizations do bulletins as well too. But the regular radio amateur is going to make contact with somebody. And I think that contact's important. But, even people you are familiar with and, you're good friends with, my colleagues at ARDC, we're in contact and communication during this trip. It's nice to have people who you're familiar with. So we have each other to rely on here. But also I have my friends from Ham Radio and also social media who I discovered because of Ham Radio. And they're excited to finally, that we meet up and have a good time. So I'm going to enjoy myself. So the other theme is youth innovation. And not only youth innovation, but Ham Radio is STEM champs, as they say. And, I really think that this represents one of the greatest potentials to grow amateur radio. Forget about where, you're just using Ham Radio to communicate. That is one thing. When you have the ability to interface directly with the space program in space, or you have the ability to do experiments, you have all the solar science stuff that Dr. Nathaniel Frizzell does at the University of Scranton. And you have so many other little things that you're doing with science and technology. It's always wonderful that citizens, ordinary people have access to this technology, and it's not confined to some government-run lab or something like that. This is the essence of amateur radio. On the flight here, I actually met a couple who were on their way to Saudi Arabia for the Hajj. And it was a husband and wife, and the wife was telling me essentially that how her daughter wants to get involved in technology. And I said, well, why don't you look into amateur radio? And in particular, look into amateur radio as it relates to space and also digital technology in amateur radio. And so we basically agreed to follow up and hopefully get some good things going. This is going to be really good. I encourage you to reach out to people and even strangers on the street, try to get them involved in amateur radio, and particularly amateur radio for its scientific and technology value, and try to get it where, people will feel the wonder and the magic. I felt the magic when I first got into amateur radio, building things and even reaching out to various places on shortwave radio, HF radio, or even on VHF. And I know it's old hat for a lot of people, but we're doing a lot of interesting things. Even some historical things. We get to experience some historical things that previous generations had as their wonder in amateur radio. So it's always nice to experience that, and not only push forward, but also to go back and rediscover our roots. And this includes things like Morse code. Morse code is fun. I love Morse code. I realize it's not a modern communications method, but it actually could provide a means to harness raw RF energy for testing various things with radio or even non-radio stuff. Always cool. So I think we're going to have a great time at the Friedrichshafen show, and looking forward to it. I realize it's probably not as physically large as Dayton Hamvention. Dayton Hamvention has its own charm too. But, being in the U.S., you kind of are among people who are in the U.S., which is pretty much, it's not a change of scenery for you. Whereas here in Europe, I have a change of scenery. I'm seeing various people who I've never met before and experiencing things that I've not experienced. This is the first time I've actually gone into continental Europe, and it's pretty interesting. They even stamped my passport. My understanding is they're not going to be doing much of that anymore. particularly for me as a shortwave talk radio broadcaster, here it's interesting to actually meet the people who your waves reach out to. So this is the thing. Now, I will say the trip up here was pretty neat. I took a nonstop flight from JFK Airport, and I chose JFK. Well, Newark has flights too, but JFK had some more convenient flights for me. And then I took the train, Deutsche Bahn. They had the trains right at the airport, and then I transferred to another train, and I got here to Friedrichshafen. It was just so convenient. I wish we had some of that in America, but in America we have trains that basically go to huge places that you park your vehicle, and then America is very car centric. I don't know how we're gonna fix that, or even if we want to, but it's a different experience here, being able to hop on a train, and the trains go pretty fast. The fastest speed I saw on one of them was about 250 kilometers per hour. In miles, let me pull out the calculator. In miles is about 155 miles per hour. That's like the maximum speed my car can go. And it was just going down the road. Cellular connectivity was, sorted out. And I'm able to use my phone here. And Wi-Fi, well, we got Wi-Fi and everything. We're expecting a thunderstorm tonight, so we'll see how that goes. Hopefully it doesn't do too much damage, or any damage, really. Maybe it just wets the ground and gives us enough. There is a Zeppelin museum nearby. In Dayton, a lot of people, when they go to Dayton, they go to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the Air Force Museum. And here we have a Zeppelin museum because Germany is known for its dirigibles, the Zeppelins, the airships, and they have the exhibits about the Hindenburg, which was a German airship, of course, everybody knows, that caught in a fiery crash in New Jersey at Lakehurst Naval Air Station. Yeah, and lots of interesting things, lots of interesting food. There's a language barrier, but, I kind of know some German, so it helps. And a lot of people here speak English in the touristy areas anyway. But it's nice to do that. Currency conversion and all sorts of stuff. Well, you deal with that. Most people use credit cards and debit cards nowadays, so we'll see how that goes. All right. Well, I will have some updates on the show in the Substack, and I'll have a full report next week in the show. So, be sure to listen next week as well. All right, let's come back with some of the news right here on Ria's Ham Shack. So, one of the great things about having an HF radio is the ability to work DX. But you need to know where you can find this DX. And you can actually find all the latest news, tips, tricks, scuttlebutt, and on-the-scene reports at dx-world.net. That's dx-world.net. My friend Call and his fabulous crew of correspondents bring you all the latest DX news from around the world right into your ham shack. Okay, so check out dx-world.net, and they also supply the news here on Ria's Ham Shack. So if you want to get the source of the news, you go to dx-world.net. That's dx-world.net. So here is the news, and this week I'm leading off with an article from Dan Romanchik, KB6NU, and he talks about a report that sheds some light on ICOM's amateur radio strategy. So he said that, and you can find this at kb6nu.com, a frequent topic of discussion in amateur radio circles is speculation about new products from major manufacturers. And there he talked about Kenwood, but he did point to a document from ICOM saying that this is their medium-term business plan 2026. And he's essentially said that, this is from ICOM, the report paints a picture of what ICOM's business strategy will be over the next 3 years. But he also said there are some interesting tidbits. One of them is that amateur radio accounts for 17% of ICOM's sales. That I think is very significant because, we think that amateur radio is like a niche for these manufacturers, and then they gain most of their money from commercial. Well, 70% is nothing to sneeze at. But what they also said is improved performance and functions of products with new platforms and technologies. So they're going to use technical know-how from digital technology and expand into other product categories. Further improve usability and intuitive operation, expansion of requested critical functions, restructuring of the product lineup. So this is kind of vague, but strengthening our business base, new business, and they're following bullet points. One of them is an AI engine core, AI functions that can be processed by general purpose CPUs. Video analysis, audio signal processing, development of video processing functions and devices. Exploring new communications methods, development of communications methods using light and sound waves in addition to radio waves in the millimeter frequency band. New market development combining traditional RF technologies, introduction of various hybrid radios, and deployment of new protocols, digitalization, etc. While not directly related to the amateur radio product line, these bullet points do point to what may be coming. All right, so AI seems to be pretty interesting. And new technologies, well, we kind of knew about that, and we kind of know about where they are going to higher frequencies, but they seem to be progressing further and further. They're going to try to bring new technologies. I know COVID has kind of like shut down everybody and made everybody sort of like kind of step back, but they are pushing ahead now, and everybody seems to be pushing ahead since COVID's pretty much kind of like just background noise at this point. So they're going to entry into different industries other than radio. They're going to be commercializing the manufacturing know-how. Then they have the Road to 100 60th anniversary in 2024, strengthening company fundamentals to become a high-profit entity, and improving existing products' performance and functionality. Products only ICOM can do. That is to be interesting for sure. Evolve from two-way radio to systems solution, total producer company, increased value proposition. And then March 2027, reaching 100. They're going to be acquiring new wireless technologies, further innovation of profit structure, integration with video, AI, and sensing, transition from sales business to system solution, sustained increase in corporate value. Right. So there, ICOM is one of these companies that has always done something sort of interesting, but you don't really see it until they're ready to release it. So I remember seeing D-Star in the early days and how they brought that out. And then I saw like the full presentation at Dayton Hamvention, where they had like all of the great plans where you could link the backhaul with microwave, and you could also connect various repeaters and such. Now D-Star has kind of come a little dated now. It's still relevant, but it's not the new kid on the block anymore. And they've been pushing a lot of interesting new technologies, some of them not so new, but just some little innovations that matter. For example, I have an ICOM 7000, and the 7000 is a unique radio in the sense that not only does it work well in the car, HF, VHF, UHF, big deal. It was their first radio with IF-DSP, one of their first radios with IF-DSP, meaning that how they had digital signal processing in the intermediate frequency stage. But they also put a video out, and I use that successfully to display the radio display on my car navigation system, which is something you haven't heard about. You're going to hear about it again, okay? In my Tesla, just watch. But yeah, they've done that. They came out with the ICOM 7300. Now, the 7300 isn't the world's first amateur SDR, but it's become the world's most popular amateur SDR. Part of the reason for that is it presents a familiar operating language, meaning that you have the familiar interface but you have the SDR performance, you have the SDR versatility, meaning that how you don't have to buy crystals for various filters and such like that. And it has the price. I mean, this thing for an SDR radio, $1,000 US, a little more, a little less, that's unheard of. So I wish them well. I know Ray Novak in the US, he has been the one who has been showcasing all this new ICOM technology. And I hope that they live long and prosper, because we need them, and we need all the manufacturers to live long and prosper. This is not just one, but, we need innovators in the industry, and we need that. I'm sure when Mr. Inoue had founded the company, he probably thought that it would have reached where it is today in some time frame, but I don't know if he knew that it would reach this way. But kudos to him for having the vision and know-how and getting ICOM to this level. But it's not just innovation in a vacuum. I think one of the things that they must do in terms of innovation is not just innovate, but also make the technology open. And by open, meaning freely accessible, not in terms of cost, but in terms of ability for manufacturers to, cooperate and build radios and not be locked into proprietary schemes such as AMBI, the voice codec. So, hey, I'm hoping maybe they'll incorporate codec 2 or some sort of other open system. That would be great, and that would help a lot of people build open hardware and open software that will work with the ICOM system and do it in very creative ways. Amateur radio is supposed to be about openness and, innovation where everybody can share, right? I don't think that anything proprietary has a place in amateur radio. I get why we've had necessity to do that in the past, but I think we're at the point where it should not be necessary anymore to be proprietary to an extent where you have to buy chips from one vendor, which is DVSI, to do a voice protocol on amateur radio bands. So shifting gears a little bit to India, where remember last week where I reported on Cyclone Biparjoy, and Biparjoy was a very destructive cyclone that went across a lot of areas of India. So we have a report here of VU2EXP. He reported that they had various stations. They had the support of GSDMA, GIAR, Gandhinagar, and coordinated and installed statewide ham radio emergency communications at several sites across India. They had 2 control rooms at Gandhinagar and Ahmedabad, and they had another emergency station in Porbandar, and they had HF, VHF, and mobile vans. So they had the ICOM 718, they had a Kenwood TM281, ICOM 1020 base for mobile. They had HTs, power supplies, cables, SWR meters, nano VNA, because you got to test stuff, and all toolkits. They used fan dipoles for 40 and 20 meters. They had NFED 40 to 10 meter half wave as a backup. They had 2 meter antennas, and they had a mag mount antenna. Pretty cool stuff. And they had they carry essential stuff like food, water bottles, medicines, rope, and they did a lot of. They were on the air from 6:30 Indian Standard Time to 0200 Indian Standard Time. They were doing weather reports, and they did some pretty interesting things. All right, very interesting stuff, and I hope that they can continue. I hope they don't have any more disasters, but I hope that they can continue. So they did provide a lot of valuable communications for this cyclone, and to provide emergency communications for them. Hey, emergency communications is the thing we do, and I support emergency communications. Okay, and kudos to them. And of course, this weekend is Friedrichshafen, but it's also ARRL Field Day, in the United States and Canada and possibly other parts of the Americas. And a lot of stations are getting out for field day. Of course, you'll see a lot of press releases out too and proclamations from various government officials about field day. So it's very good. And like I said last week, get your congressperson involved if you haven't already. But their schedule is probably full already. If you can get a representative from their office to visit, that'll be cool, especially since now we have legislation that we need to get passed. So field day is a very important exercise. It's Amateur Radio's open house. It's kind of about emergency communications, although I'm not really of the opinion that it's an emergency communications test. Please don't make it too rigid where people don't have fun. But I'll tell you that it is important for us to test out our capability and also to learn to encourage new people, to encourage old people, like people who've been in the hobby a while, and also to have fun and have fellowship with your fellow radio amateurs. I'll be probably doing some remote contacts. We'll see how that goes. My system runs on batteries, so I have emergency power for that. Okay, that's great stuff. Field day. It's this weekend. It's what's for lunch, breakfast, and dinner. Okay, so let's talk about some DX. I know we haven't been doing much DX news, but there's been some DX. You have 4W8X, and this is from DX World, dx-world.net. 4W8X Timor-Leste, so East Timor. They'll be active in 2023, and they'll have 20 plus operators from all over Europe, and they will be sent via sea freight in July. And the first pioneers, so-called pioneers, well, they're pioneers. They will arrive on Sunday, the 5th of November to start with preparations. After a couple of days, they'll be on the air, but only for a few hours. And then on the 12th of November, they'll finish the setup and start on 24/7 shifts. Okay, great. That's good. So nice to hear that. Then you have Grenada in 2024. You have some Belgians will be active from J3 in Grenada during 4th to 16th of March. And they will plan to operate on 160 to 10 meters. Very good. All right, Ethiopia, and then that's kind of a rare one, not really that active. So you have LA9IAA from Bjorn. LA9IAA will be active along with Bob W9XY and the students at ET3AA, and they will be there. Ducia Island is still plodding along. They have their radio in a box, which seems to be working quite well. George AA7JV, he's operating, and they have quite a plethora of remote operations. CB0ZA, Juan Fernandez Island, they've gotten authorization from the National Forestry Corporation to operate from Cerro del Centinela, which is within the Juan Fernandez National Park. That's good. And that's great. JA8COE, Yagishiri Island, that's Iota Island, AS147. So Taka JA8COE, he'll be active from Yagishiri Island, AS147, during June 23 to 25th. That's this weekend. So that's good. And, there's been a little discussion about making the honor roll achievable again. So HB9GBV, he has a nice editorial, so you could go on dx-world.net. But essentially, the people are arguing that the honor roll is hard to achieve now, impossible, because the nature, like a lot of these entities that you need to work are off limits because of nature preserves. It's too expensive and it's too dangerous. And then, of course, you have places where you have regimes that ban amateur radio, such as North Korea and Turkmenistan. Yeah, hard to believe Turkmenistan got on that list. This is kind of controversial. I think people see honor roll as a journey and not as a destination, and it's supposed to be a hard achievement, but we'll see how it is. But check it out. He says essentially that if an entity has not been activated for more than 15 years, then it should be suspended and no longer count toward the honor roll. But as soon as a qualified activation has taken place, and he's saying 5,000 QSOs, the entity should change back to current. Okay, well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if the ARRL will change it. I'm thinking they probably won't. There have been some really strange ideas coming out of the ARRL. Somebody said, I can't confirm this, where David Minster seems to want to think that if somebody operates from a ship near to an entity, that how it should count. I don't know. Maybe they're referring to the radio in a box. I that would be plausible. But from a ship nearby, no, I don't think that's supposed to work. I think you're supposed to actually be on the entity. Otherwise, what's the use? You know, you're going to make it too easy. But anyway, so that is that. And then you have the Faroes Island. They're going to be active OY/SP7VC, active from July 23rd to 26th. That's next month. And then also from the Iceland, it's going to be active from July 27 to August 17. Very good. And then, so that's a lot of good DX news. If you have news tips, do send them to ria@n2rj.com. I do have one. Oscar India is going along with plans for their conference, so hopefully they have good attendance. They've asked me to attend, so I don't know. So one final one, if you're in the United States or you have a United States amateur radio license, the Universal Licensing System, which is part of the FCC website, which allowed the transaction of licenses and other things, it has been down for some unknown reason. And they finally got back up. However, they're not doing batch processing of licenses. So the VEs, like the ARRL, kind of had to slow down and submit them in the background. But it is back up. It was down for a while. Who knows? It's some IT issue, it seems. Servers or software or something they had. And they finally got it back up. So if you did have a license transaction that you wanted to do, well, now is probably the time to do it. All right, let's break and come right back right here on Ria's Ham Shack. All the ways to listen to Ria's Ham Shack, let me count the ways. The first and the best way is, of course, on WRMI Legends 5050 on your shortwave dial and other frequencies as appropriate. You can also listen on the podcast wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You can listen on WRMILegends.com where we have it on the live stream. You can catch it on Ria Ham Shack YouTube channel. Just look for youtube.com/@n2rj. I publish a show and it's always a few days after it airs on WRMI Legends. And if you want to get the show first, you go on WRMI Legends 5050 shortwave or on WRMILegends.com. Of course, you can also go on WRMILegends.com to find out ways to support the show and support the station and to keep the tubes glowing and keep the fabulous shortwave programming coming. Now back to Ria's Ham Shack. Okay, you thirst for knowledge in amateur radio, and I provide you with some answers. So Audrey says she's wondering if anybody could advise on what this is, what it's used for, and essentially it's a Signal Corps frequency meter TS175, I believe, 85 to 1000 megacycles, and essentially somebody made a joke that said it's Gary Pierce. It's useful if it's currently 1944 and trying to calibrate some army radios someplace in central France. Yeah, okay. So a lot of time vintage equipment doesn't really have that much use. If it's a vintage transceiver, it will likely be useful. However, if it's like a vintage piece of test equipment or something like that, it might not be useful. But it depends. A lot of equipment for military use is probably not that useful today. But it might have been back in the day. So the next question concerns mobile setups. And this question is Mobile Gurus. This is from Kelly from Ham Radio 2.0. Is it impossible to have too much mass bonded in a vehicle for HF? So is 991A, that's a HF radio, and ATAS 120A, which is a HF antenna. Mobile Assault seems to have worse transmit as I add bonding to the panels. The antenna by itself is mounted to the camper, allowed me to contact Europe. As he's added bonding, it seems to be struggling more. Maybe he's introduced some ground loop common mode issues. Receive seems to be doing better, but not getting out like I was. Just changing propagation not resolved with bonding, so he's going to disconnect and reconnect the main bond. So, there's no easy answer to this. It's not really that how much bonding, but the thing is where you bond and how you bond. You bond with flat copper strap or flat braided cable. And, generally more bonding is good, but bonding can shift the way an antenna behaves, right? A lot of mobile antennas are probably not designed to have this big mass of metal below them. They're designed for poorly grounded ground planes. So, really think that there's nothing wrong with your setup. And, I think that the conditions are better than where they are right now, but maybe you need to retune the antenna, who knows. And then propagation really hasn't been all that good lately, to be honest. But the best thing to do actually is to get like a nano VNA type of thing or a Rig Expert antenna analyzer and then put it on it and then see, that if that works. Now, the other thing could be that the counterpoises on the metal roof are so close to the antenna's active element. So maybe there's some interaction, maybe. But that could be it. Could be as well that there could be a situation where RF is flowing back and you might need probably a choke or something like that. So anyway, so that is, there's several things. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell what, what's going on there. Okay. So next question is about which countries has the most ham radio operators. So the answer by far is, if you don't count the European Union as a country, is the United States. And now Japan used to have a lot of amateur radio licenses, but what happened is Japan they had like club calls and other call signs that were in there counted as radio operators. And then eventually what happened, and then people died because, a lot of people, Japan has a really aging population. So a lot of people essentially died and their licenses were never removed from the database. So they had 1.2 million, and then they knocked that down to 300 something thousand because they removed a lot of duplicates and they also removed a lot of silent keys, sadly, So that is essentially it. So so it's the United States. I mean, Japan has a respectable amount with something like 300 something thousand. Thailand has a lot of them. Korea has a lot of them. Germany, of course, has a lot of them. And German hams are very, they seem to be very savvy and technically knowledgeable. China has a lot of them. Spain, the UK, Canada, and then Russia. Russia, I think it's almost like a national pastime there. And then the least amount, of course, would be some countries where they don't have amateur radio, like North Korea. They don't have any. Trinidad and Tobago, I think, had like 400 of them. Not a lot, especially since now it costs $100 to keep your license per year. So this question is about Chirp versus RT systems. So how does Chirp compare to RT systems? Well, I can tell you Chirp, and this is not a knock on open source projects. Chirp is a free software project, whereas RT systems is developed commercially. There have been reports of some radios being bricked by Chirp, and but Chirp tends to support a lot of different radios. Chirp is kind of free, but it's experimental. I'll tell you, RT Systems, of course, a sponsor of WRMI Legends, rtsystemsinc.com, they they provide a quality product, and they're actually recommended by Yaesu. So Yaesu, if you have a Yaesu radio, you probably want to use RT Systems. All right, next one. Field A. Is it about the radio or the antenna? Which is most important? So I would say the antenna. Has to be the antenna. The antenna always goes first. My rule, I keep saying it over and over. If you have money to invest, the first thing you invest in is the antenna. The last thing you invest in is the radio, because a mediocre radio with a great antenna will perform better than a mediocre antenna with a great radio. Period. End of story. Of course, there are some caveats to that, right? Like the radios must be able to have two characteristics: selectivity, where they're able to pick out various signals, and sensitivity, where they're able to receive weak signals. And you'll find top radios from various manufacturers like ICOM. They have great selectivity and great sensitivity. And selectivity, there's also a nuance in that. There's something called RMDR, which is where you can listen to weak signals in the presence of very strong ones. So this is useful for things like contests and also DXing, right? Contests where you compete, DXing where you try to work distant stations from other countries. So this question is, how much more difficult has the extra exam gotten since you got licensed? So I got licensed in 2001. And the older exams, of course, I wouldn't say they were more difficult, but they had a different method of testing. They had a little more different technologies, right? I think that what happened over the years is that the exams changed to match some of the newer technologies that have been showing up in amateur radio. And as a result, some people think it's more difficult. Some people think it's easier because those technologies make life easier. But I don't think it really has changed in difficulty. I think it's just changed in content, right? So let's see here. Oh, yes. So somebody was given this a static D104 and has a 4-pin CB type connector. The only radio is a Baofeng. If they can find an adapter to use this mic with it, probably. But you're going to run into a few things. One of them is that the impedance of the microphone is 100,000 ohms, 100 kilo ohms. And the Baofengs are like 600 ohms impedance, so there's going to be a mismatch. I would say save that microphone for another radio, maybe like a HW101 or some of these older tube type radios. Right, next one is, I have a question. Is there any bands that have slower CW? Well, slower CW, you find that on 40 meters a lot. You find especially in the portion above 7100. And there you'll find several slow speed CW, slow speed Morse code nets, and people love to do that. You also find people making casual contacts. The reason is that region used to be home to, and still is home to, the novice licensees. Of course, the novice licensees are dwindling in number. But, technicians also had access to that band. And, of course, now the technicians have access to the entire general CW portion. But the novices had access to that too. So you'll find some up there. But there are organized groups on social media, such as Facebook, that will do schedules, contacts there. So look out for them. Just look for slow speed CW net and you'll find it there. So this next question is about the DXCC program. So the DXCC is an awards program from the ARL that focuses on DX, right? DX meaning working different countries. And this person says that how a lot of his cards are from the early 80s. Many countries, especially in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union, are different. How are these counted? For example, he has a card from Lithuania with UK2, but Lithuania is now LY and UK2 is Asiatic Russia. And UK3 and UA0 both say Russia on the card, but now it looks like UK3 is Uzbekistan. The card says Moscow, and UA0 is also Asiatic Russia. So do these count for what they were then or what they are now? It's a bit confusing. So there are a couple things to unpack here. First of all is that the prefixes on the cards are the prefixes of the contacts work then might still match to a country that exists today. So those will count just as a regular country today. There are a lot of entities that came and went, particularly with the breakup of the Soviet Union. And what you'll find is that some of them count as deleted entities, meaning that you can't make new contacts with them, but they will be counted in your DXCC records for some parts of the award, namely the mixed award and also the individual band awards. But they will not count for some of the newer awards such as DXCC Challenge, which is a challenge you work current entities on different bands. They will also not count for other awards that require current entities. So mostly it's DXCC Challenge, but there are other awards that require current entities. So, but still count them, maybe talk to a DXCC card checker. I am a DXCC card checker, so I can actually look at it. There are websites that, for example, Clublog has this call tester. Okay, so if you go to clublog.org, and then you have like there under tools, there's something called a call tester. And what you do is, it's on the left side. What you do is you put in the call sign and you put in the date of the confirmation. And then once you do that, it will tell you exactly which entity it counted for and whether it's current or deleted. Isn't that cool? That's a wonderful tool from clublog.org. And then you'll see it there. So make sure you check that out. That's a way to check all your old QSL cards if you're a DXer. Of course, having that'll bump up your DXCC totals, but having these old cards, kind of like brings back history, especially with events such as the breakup of the Soviet Union and also the German, the German Democratic Republic, which essentially went away, and the whole thing became Federal Republic of Germany when the Berlin Wall came down. So German reunification, right? Very cool stuff. And, you chronicle world history with your amateur radio contacts. Okay, this next question has to do with mobile antenna installation. Jack is considering putting a mobile install in his vehicle, putting a radio in his vehicle, rather than running wires for power. Can he just use the power port in the vehicle? Like all things, it depends. And I would say the answer is likely no, because on transmit, these radios draw a lot of power, right? For example, an HF radio will draw about 25 amps on transmit. A VHF radio will draw about 10 amps. And most power ports in cars are rated at 10 amps, if that. I know, when you're running the radio, you're going to find that you're not able to charge your cell phone. So why do you want to do that? Okay? You should always run your radio either direct to the battery or have a separate battery. Now, in my case, in a Tesla, it's a little tricky because my Tesla has a new battery system with a 15.5 volt lithium battery. And in order to get a radio to operate, I need to put a separate battery and put a charge controller to have a trickle charge. This way that it's not putting strain on a DC to DC converter, and it's not, it's not causing any harm to the vehicle. So that's one way you got to do it. A lot of high power ham stations, because of the intermittent nature of amateur radio transmission and power draw, you're able to actually get away with running a battery setup and have a trickle charge from the alternator. And this is how a lot of people do it. You're not continuously drawing that amount of power, period. So, all right, next one is, this person says, am I the only one not to log wires X and DMR internet contacts? So wires access and DMR internet contacts are basically internet modes that use radio. And do I put them in my logbook? No, because I use my logbook primarily for awards. And awards don't count those contacts. But can you put it? Yes, you can. Should you put it? I don't know. It's up to you. They don't count for awards. But, some people, they don't care about that. They care about their memories in their logbook. And the logbook chronicles their amateur radio adventures. So if you want to put it there, by all means. If you care mostly about awards, I wouldn't bother. The nice thing is, in most countries, it's not required to keep a logbook anymore. You do it, it's very helpful, and there are good reasons for keeping a logbook. One of them, of course, is to apply for awards. The other one is that if you ever have an interference complaint, you can refer to a logbook and said, well, these were the times I was on the air, and these are the times I was not. Does it coincide? Because a lot of people, what they will do is they will see your antennas, and then they will suddenly see that they have interference, regardless, okay? Yes, so it's, you got to protect yourself, and the logbook is one way to do it. So this question concerns radio brands, and in particular, Alinco and Anytone. So some people have said, well, how do you like Alinco or Anytone? Well, Alinco is actually not a bad radio. I've been using Alinco radios for a very long time, and they're actually pretty good quality. Now, Alinco actually has been one of the only brands of radios that supports the 222 megahertz band. And they have the Alinco DR235, which supports FM on 222. And they have a number of other radios too. And they also make DMR radios, and they're a trusted brand. They've been around. They advertise in the amateur radio magazines. They're carried by leading amateur radio dealers, so I have no problem placing trust in them. So I've been using them for a long time. Good stuff. They are a little more on the basic side, meaning how they don't have the big bells and whistles like the ICOM or Kenwood or Yaesu do, but, they do the job. And many people use Alinco radios for various things. I have about half a dozen of them that I use for various things. Anytone. So Anytone is kind of at least new to the US brand, and they're a Chinese brand. Nothing wrong with Chinese brand, but they're kind of unknown to a lot of people. I would say among Chinese brands, they're a little more, I would say, higher quality and have better features. So they don't have like some of the issues of Baofeng, where, for example, Baofeng, you would find that their radios tend to have higher spurious emissions, or they tend to have lower receive quality. Anytone seems to be a higher quality product. There are many different varieties of radios, and I will say this about radio brands. I don't have brand loyalty per se. I tend to gravitate more toward the more established brands, like on HF, I have ICOM and also Flex Radio and Kenwood. Those are mine. Nothing wrong with Yaesu. I know a lot of people love Yaesu. Tentec, when they were making radios, they were good too. Alinco actually makes an HF radio, which is pretty nice. And of course, there are other little projects too, but I'm talking about more like the mainstream commercially built transceiver brands. On VHF, UHF, Alinco is nice. And ICOM is good. Kenwood is good if you can find a Kenwood radio. And Yaesu is good. Now, what I like about Yaesu is that they used to at least build their radios pretty rugged. I have a Yaesu VX5 that I've had for a long time, and that radio is pretty much still going. I dropped it on the floor, and it has a metal case, and it's kind of like, it's a bit waterproof. They made one called the VX7, which is submersible, so you could drop it in a bucket of water and nothing will happen. You could drop it in the ocean, I'm not going to make a joke about the Titanic. I'm sorry. And that's an unfortunate incident. But you can drop it in the ocean and then pick it back up and use it as new. Other manufacturers, there used to be a whole bunch of other manufacturers. There was like Santec, and Santec made a radio. I have one at home. It's actually pretty nice. They have other handhelds. And Alinco, by the way, made a couple of credit card size handhelds, and I have one of them. The DJ C1T, which is a credit card size handheld. And you use that mainly for short point-to-point communications. You could probably use it on a repeater. I also use it with a crossband repeater. So I had a crossband repeater in my car, a Yaesu 8900, another great radio. I use that to go through the crossband repeater and then make contacts that way. So I could park my car somewhere and then have the handheld, and then I could get in on using the 50-watt powerful radio rather than this dinky little handheld. Yeah. So different strokes for different folks. I'll tell you my opinion as well on different, what are their strengths. So ICOM tends to be a little more user-friendly in terms of like the features, their familiar interface. They don't really change much on their radios in terms of user interface. And as Ray Novak told me, they have a lot of things for the everyday ham. They're not really designed for things that are like esoteric, even though now they're getting into more esoteric things. But they have things for the everyday ham. Yaesu tend to focus a little more on ergonomics. Yaesu, they have like very smooth tuning knobs, and they have very sleek looking radios, and they're really going after the aesthetics crowd. And they make good radios. But, their radios kind of feel good. ICOM radios feel nice too, but Yaesu knobs are a little heavier, and they feel a little, more, they feel like you're driving a performance car. I'm sure if you take an expensive radio like the 7851 and you use that, it will probably feel the same way. Elecraft, the controls on Elecraft are the exact opposite. They feel very, I wouldn't say cheap. I'll say they feel sort of, not very high end. But don't let that fool you. The performance in those radios is very good. The Elecraft K3 in particular has been on many a D expedition, and the K4 is sure to please as well. And Flex Radio, well, Flex Radio is Flex Radio. Flex Radio, they are currently the king of remote operation, and they have a lot of strengths in that area, and they're one of the best ones in terms of remote operation and system integration. You'll find that Kenwood's kind of become a little static in terms of its HF offerings. When I asked the Kenwood rep if they're going to bring out an HF radio at Dayton, he said maybe in a few years. That didn't sound very committal to me. But they're renowned for their audio. Okay, so if you want a good radio for audio, you want Kenwood. All right, well, that's about all the time we have this week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Ria's Ham Shack right here from Germany, Friedrichshafen. And I hope to see some of you at the show, those of you who are listening. And I hope to see you some other time, maybe on the bands, or maybe even stateside. My friends, until next time, this is Ria N2RJ. Wishing you the very best DX, and have a great field day if you're in the United States. If you're in other countries, I hope you have a great weekend on the radio. And of course, if you're in Europe and you're attending Ham Radio Friedrichshafen, be sure to look out for me. I will be around. You know where to find me. I'll be with ARDC, and you could find me and easily, let's chat and meet up face to face. Okay, my friends, this has been Ria's Ham Shack. To support the show, you go to WRMILegends.com. I am Ria N2RJ saying peace and 73. Thank you to all.